Friends, in literature, criticism has gained grounds as tradition. For classical arts and its appreciation also, there have been discourses. The theories have come after the creation. However, a thing of beauty admired by all allows its appreciation with criticism, which not in narrow sense but in a larger context, adding to the interpretation. Critique, as defined as in academic terms, is someone who is a public arbitrator of taste or opinion. On various matters of artistic value, the etymology of the word critique finds itself in the literary history of the Greeks, who is defined kritikos, or meaning a person who offers reasoned judgment or analysis, value judgment, interpretation or observations. But with all this, one has to bear in mind that this act of criticism is a very subjective task. Dance criticism demands a study of history of entire performing arts. Dance is a composite art. It involves movement, music, rhythm, time cycle, literature, sculpture, painting, lighting, costumes, colors, textures, and an ability to respond to all these elements. Naturally, it involves interdisciplinary approach. In Vishnu Dharmottara Purana, when King Vajra asked Markandeya to teach him how to make idols, Pratima, the sage asked him to study painting, then vocal music and also instrumental music, literature, dance and sculpture. Then only the king can learn how to make Pratima, idols. This interdependence or interdisciplinary approach is the rigor for the dance criticism. Over several centuries, those who attempted appreciation of objects of art had to subject themselves to such studies. Dance criticism in India and Indian context, for an example, involves study of the manual termed as Natya Shastra texts, written nearly 2500 years ago between 1st century BC and 4th century AD. Natya Shastra text provides an example for anyone to admire dance, drama, offers guidelines. It has a sutra, a theoretical statement, Bhavanubhava Vyabhichari Sanyogat Rasa Nishpatti. The relish, enjoyment of all arts is a result of various sentiments and emotions. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, also mentions catharsis, which approximates to rasanubhava, experience of the relish. The theoreticians have discussed threadbare the various opinions. Mimamsa, the discussion is age-old tradition. It is universal. It varies with various nations, civilizations, but admits of different opinions also. When one looks at the rhetoric that developed in India, the commentaries of scholars threw light on the complex nature of arts. Commentators of Natya Shastra like Lolata, Shankuka, Tauta and Abhinavgupta dealt with the various branches of philosophy. Dance criticism thus involves study of these commentaries. Dance criticism poses many problems. The first hurdle is the limited and reductive definition of criticism. Is criticism just a description of performances, or is it a judgment of performances? Is it the reliving of his or her experience by the critic? Is dance criticism normative in following any canons or set rules? Who is a critic after all? Is a critic a writer or an activist or a scholar? Does he need to be a dancer himself? Is a specialist critic relevant anymore? What purpose does criticism serve? Is its purpose publicity for dance or dancer? Should it record dance history? Is it to educate, spread awareness about dance? Is he a watchdog of dancing? Does he provide the standards for the art? Is it the custodians of dance? Does it serve to propagate and popularize dance? What purpose does criticism serve in specific context? Dance criticism has to deal with difficult terrain of ethics. Ideals and conflicts of interest have to be negotiated even while intellectualizing about dance and dance criticism. The flaws of dance criticism and critics themselves one has to take into account. Dance criticism in print media and also elsewhere empowers the critic with certain power. Whereas the performance is seen by few persons, the review is read by several people across the country and with e-edition also abroad. The critic is in a position to influence the readers in favor of the dancer, or he or she can prejudice the reader who might get an impression which either impress the readers with good opinion and an adverse review might affect a dancer's popularity. Unfavorable review invariably hurts a dancer unless he or she is open to criticism and has faith in the credentials of the critic. If she or he has faith in the dancer, would take it in good spirit, and if a critic has suggested improvement in a certain area, the dancer can be benefited. But if the dancer feels she has been done injustice, the only recourse he has to send a letter to the editor for the column of the reader's right. Sometimes the argument between the critic and the dancer is not understood by the readers unless the readers are alert in the issues raised by the critic. What has been termed as the constructive criticism has enough scope for avoiding unpleasantness. Striking a personal note, I would like to mention two cases where a celebrated dancer took offense and sent legal notice to the dance critic. The newspaper baron editors generally provide a window for ventilating groups of dancers by publishing his point of view. But in a few cases, the offended dancer resorts to filing a legal case for defamation. In India, there are strict rules regarding defamation. Unless understood correctly, the defamation case involves a heavy penalty. The offended party is required to deposit a substantial sum of money for legal case. That deters a dancer to file a legal case for hefty amounts. Even if a dancer sends a legal notice, the legal department of the newspaper takes care of the situation and sees that the critic of the newspaper are not at fault nor appear guilty in the legal terms. An offended dancer demands in his legal notice for an abject apology to be carried in the same newspaper in which unfavorable criticism is published. The critic, with his own dignity and his understanding of the rights, both legal and criminal, defends himself. The fact that a dancer performs in public and the organizers send invitation to the editor to send their critique to review the performance, the opinion of the critic, even when challenged, is subject to legal nuances and complexities. An opinion of an established critic is often shared by the discerning readers in public domain. Unless proven that the critic was in his writing had a malicious intention and had thereby damaged the reputation of the dancer, the case generally is dismissed. A dancer also does not want to draw attention to her shortcoming as mentioned in his criticism or his performance, and more often the matter is settled outside the court with a certain sense of arbitration. This power struggle has taken, unfortunately, in India an unpleasant turn. Dancers with their political connections have threatened dance critics of dire consequences, but it has not worked in dancers' favors. When dancers thought their social connection with political powers have tried to intimidate dance critics, the newspapers had always stood by the dance critic. So far, no dance critic has been fired for dancers' ire. What has resulted on account of dancers' such attempts and the mindless unnecessary controversies, the press, barons and editors in particular, in case of the Times of India group of publications, took a decision to do away with all art reviews barring film reviews. When dancers in Delhi, wearing designers' black clothes, called a press meeting as read out grouses against the critics, they became a laughing stock, as they did not invite painters, sculptors, musicians, writers, and went on lodging complaints against newspapers and critics. They lost support of all other artists of various disciplines. Their complaints did not move the editors and the press barons. The press did away with the criticism. Following the Times of India's example, all major English newspapers stopped dance reviews in particular and the other reviews in general. With the result, the press and the dancers killed the institution of criticism. No amount of writing letters to the press barons and editors helped the situation, barring one English newspaper, The Hindu. All English newspapers disaway with columns on dance and other arts in India. Earlier, even newspapers like the Economic Times, the Financial Express, the Business Standards used to carry weekly columns in their Sunday editions by few established critics. The dancers lost that space also. Today in India, as a global phenomenon, the space has shrunk in prime media for dance reviews. Abroad, in spite of demand from the readers to have review columns, the space for dance reviews has shrunk. The press barons found out that there is a small community of readers who are interested in reading reviews. Therefore, they could easily ignore their demand. And the space which they used to devote for dance, painting, music, drama, sculpture, literature, they started using that space for advertising and turned into profit-making propositions. In case of Hindu, when they appointed only one critic to review dance, it also resulted into an imbalanced view for dancers and readers. Whereas in past, there were more than one critics in big cities like Mumbai and Delhi. Since only one critic for a particular edition of Capital, New Delhi, the critic appointed rode like a colossus and his opinions only mattered without consideration for a different views. This critic enjoyed the supreme unchallenged position as the dancers started currying favors of the critic. Fortunately, the critic happened to be a strong and fair person. Therefore, the situation was saved. But it showed that such a policy does not help the dance scene. A dance critic or a body of dance critics writing in several newspapers can guide the dance scene, indicate the trends, document through their reviews important performances, bring to notice of the public emerging young gifted talented dancers, and thereby serve the cause of dance and keep the dance scene alive. That possibility has gone. Of course, there is what they call word of mouth publicity. Therefore, there is a buzz about emerging or young talented dancers about whom people talk and inform the organizers also. As a matter of fact, when there were no newspapers and media, that was the only way where the artist and up and coming used to get known. The problem of writing on dance poses many problems. It is a specialized art critic has to translate a performed art into readable print. The dancers dances and that is the end. What critics write become permanent. If critics' judgment are wrong, they will haunt them till their dying days. One has to be aware and not take oneself seriously and sermonize. It is considered cardinal sin because the reviews become boring. No one wants a plow through labored prose that send readers to sleep. Also, critics are not infallible. They are human beings and like dancers and choreographers have their own failings. Earlier, there were several pressures to which a critic was submitted when the reviews were carried in the newspapers the very next day. But such challenges kept the critics alert and made them more responsible, as they had to be careful and correct in their writing. else their writing would be questioned. Those who have no experience or talent to write a reasonably good command over English when they venture to write and serve sermon dancers feel that they have violated traffic rules. Critics have to be very careful in their choice of words. The most important newspaper, the New York Times, enjoys a great reputation for dance criticism. In the beginning, when John Martin, a knowledgeable writer on the subject, started writing as a dance critic, he was indeed a pioneer. His balanced writing created an awareness about the developing dance art in America. It was also the time when dancers like Martha Graham were innovative and creating modern dance. John Martin's sympathetic writing, making readers to understand what she was attempted to present in dance, helped modern dance to establish in America. After John Martin, the other dance critic who served as full-time dance critic for 21 years was Anna Kisselgoff. Her writing was much respected as she took great pains to study the dance forms of different countries. She wrote in a language which was highly readable. New York, London, Paris, Sydney are world capitals for dance, and the population want to read about dance. Therefore, the newspapers in these countries have full-time paid dance critics, unlike in India where a dance critic is paid paltry sum for each review. The institution of dance critic has thrived in America and in England. London has a sizable readership for dance, in particular classical ballet, has an international audience and also a tourist attraction. The dance form sells. The interdependence of economy and ballet as an art form permitted the press to provide space for informed criticism. In London, there are unions like Authors Union and Dance Critics Association as in America that gives the writers legal status. Such unions protect the rights of critics. They also provide to retain economic stability to the authors and the critics. In Indian context, nothing like such union or association exists. The dance critics are hired by the editors, press barons, or some information about them knowledgeable writers on the subject. Barring a few editors in India, most of the editors are not interested in classical dance. The situation now has worsened. Since the space has shrunk and the internet has arrived, not many trained dance critics write for online journals or blogs. The quality of writing is often unedited and lengthy, and credibility of dance critics is questionable. Unless the content editor knows the subject and his responsibility, he does not edit the text and anything goes. In print media, the news editor or the subject editor uses his direction and edited unpleasant expressions. Unfortunately, the content editor taken recourse to excuse like his own limited knowledge, and therefore unsavory language and improper criticism lowers the standard of dance criticism. Also, rarely the critic is paid. Of late, the New York Times has engaged Alistair Macaulay, a renowned dance and theatre critic from London, who has for the past 10 years taken over as a chief dance critic of New York Times. Since New York is the Mecca of dance, the paper employs 2 or 3 more critics who are like understudy, but provide also insightful criticism. Whereas Alistair's style and writings are engaging, very reader friendly, and at the same time very illuminating, there is a steady readership for his reviews. He has also undertaken serious study of classical Indian dance forms like Bharatanatyam and Odissi, and has been visiting India to study its history and attend annual prestigious dance and music festivals. His writing has acquired credibility, and Indian classical dance has been finding enough coverage in the New York Times, it has a snowballing effect as dancers from India who regularly perform in New York get coverage by someone whose review based on knowledge of Indian culture and tradition. The American reader now is inclined to watch Indian classical dance and not as an exotic ethnic dance as they were known in the media, but as a classical dance form at par with mainstream modern contemporary and classical ballet dance from the West. Since the New York Times provides large space for coverage of Indian dance, the Indian diaspora dancers have gained their position among their contemporary counterparts. One more issue about writing in English. It poses many problems as every time the translation of certain terms are not saying what exactly the critic has to say. The issue of terminology is of great importance. For innovative work, the terms in India in English is mentioned as experimental, innovative, contemporary, modern. None of these terms reflect what exactly the critic wants to communicate. The difficulty in translating movement through words is a big challenge. The responsibility of the critic is rather very hard. He has to convey what exactly he means. It would be pertinent to quote the opinions of dance critics from London. A group of dance critics, when were asked several relevant questions, had come to the following conclusion about dance criticism. Carly Brahms said about the true function of criticism. It is to maintain and improve upon the standards of creation and performance, to hold the past and the present as an insurance policy for the future, to discern the intention of the artist and weigh it against his achievement, and to discuss all this is in totality objective light of the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, in words of 1, 2 or 3 syllables. Richard Buckle has said, the true function of criticism is to expose and celebrate the virtue of masterpiece, and it should shake the public confidence in the superiority of the second rate. Legendary British critic E.V. Cotton has observed, the true function of criticism is the recording of judgment by competent analysts and appreciation of the creation and performance of works of art, that by way of discussion and commentment. These verdicts shall acquire value in their own right and assist other appreciators in arriving at their own verdicts. Inevitably, criticism affects nearly all creators and interpreters of art in their future activities. Few critics are important in themselves, as great critics is as rare as the great artist, and the art of dance knows very few first-rate critics. But the taste and discrimination of the majority of them is part of the record of art, and it helps in guiding and shaping the taste of the later generations. No criticism of the slightest use ever to any person unless the critic's integrity is assured. This is an absolute condition of criticism. It follows that no critic can ever be financially favored in even the remotest way by any organization or person making, presenting or interpreting works of art. Peter Williams, editor of Dancing Times, London, has observed, the function of criticism is to inform and guide public about a performance and its performers, though adverse criticism has frequently been needed. Praise does not good only to the press representative and the impresario. Responding to such remarks, some of the leading dancers, choreographers, among them well-known Anton Dolin, had said, the critic should justify the space that permits an unbiased report of the performance witnessed. He should not obtrude his own personality, but should inform a supposedly eager public about the performance which they may see. Instead of dilating about himself, whom they will probably never meet, Mary Rembert, the choreographer who contributed a great deal in making ballets and dance popular among the British public and all over Europe, observed the perfect and on reply to this question of the true function of dance criticism is what Richard Buckle has said. I envisage the critic as being foredoomed to perpetual striving in solitude after what he knows is unattainable. He must seek constantly and passionately to perceive more than those who attend the theatre merely to enjoy themselves. Thereafter, the performance, I see him again struggling frantically and hopelessly to communicate his discoveries and reactions, to offer some revealing flash of insight to his readers, realizing the while that the achievement of his aim remains the sole justification of his existence. No wonder the poet has said in India, the path of the critic is walking on the Shurasya Dhara, that is, the double-edged sword.